Okay, so on tonight's service call, we have an indirect, right? We have a house, old school. We have nothing. I'm making a video. We have zone valve. There's 3. You keep going down the line. There's another one on the other side of the steps and one all the way down at the end of the house. They ran 1.25 inches and then ended up stepping down to 1 inch there, right? Which is fine. But the complaint here is basically this hot water gets way too hot. So where this gets really interesting is they use these zone valve control, because obviously there's zone valves. There's a system pump here, and this is for the hot water. So realistically, when the boiler fires, this pump comes on immediately. So that's problem number 1. This pump for the indirect, which is for the water heater, that guy, right? We want the aquastat to get below 140 degrees, 120, whatever you have it set at. And then basically it sends a signal through a dry contact through this wire. And then it should go realistically to the control. So if you follow the wiring here, you have a head scratcher because the water in this house is boiling hot. It's probably 150 degrees. I haven't bothered to test it. And you look, and you got your normally closed and your common wire here. So that controls this pump when one of these zone valves is calling. You have a series of lights. Zone valve, and then power, zone valve, power, zone valve, power. The zone valve comes on. Once power is applied, it then sends basically from the thermostat, sends power back up through, and boom, opens the zone valve. The funny one here, though, is if you follow the end switch wiring, and then you follow the indirect thermostat wiring, or the aquastat, you bring it over, they both run into the control. This is your aquastat. This is where it gets funny. You wonder why both pumps run. Look what they did. They wired the end switch and TT for the aquastat together. Well, what this tells me is that the minute we have power applied, so you can see here, you have circulator, you have C1, which is this guy, and then you have C2, that's the common, the neutral, right? That runs back to the indirect pump. The minute this gets power from the burner, and it sends a signal and comes on, C1 goes from a normally open to a normally closed contact, and then it turns that pump on, right? So then that pump moves water through the circuit. Well, it's backwards, guys. What we want is the indirect to basically come over, and we want the indirect to be what kicks on the aquastat to then send power. This is really old school, so I think somebody thought that they had a good idea back in the day, and it probably worked. But the problem that you face now is both pumps, when a zone is calling, or power is applied basically from the aquastat to the burner, it closes. This constantly has water running through it. It's a huge waste of electricity. So what I'm going to end up doing is taking the end switch off, right? And then wiring it to its prospective selection on the board here. And then, so that way there, when that calls, the indirect needs priority. That is the only thing that's getting water run through it. And then when the indirect hits its temperature, it opens the terminals, right? Allows this pump to stop flowing water. And then this pump can come online. These zone valves that are calling can then say, okay, we need to flow water to the prospective zone. And then it runs up on this system up through the supply, and then over and into whatever zone and up, and then back on the return, comes back on this other pipe, basically that runs in here, and then over, and then the pump is on the return, boom, and then brings water back to the boiler. So this is where, I get paid the big bucks because I've got a lot of experience. This took me about 15 minutes to figure out. It took other people 3 or 4 years. My stepdad lived with this with my mother for 20 years. So we'll fix it. We're going to get rid of the water that literally will melt your skin off, which some of you like, but I don't. And we'll get it dialed in. And then the other thing, too, about this is you can see here, you put galvy on copper on brass. See how much corrosion there is right there. And then also, 130,000 BTUs. You never, ever, 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 ever run any indirect of any type and anything smaller than 1 inch, if there's a tapping off of the supply and the return that go to the boiler, which are there and there, you don't downsize the tappings. A BTU is a BTU. You need to size the pipe correctly so that water can flow and you can get the recovery when this water heater is empty, right? So that it can fill as fast as possible. If you undersize this, you're basically, it's like taking and putting your fingers in a Chinese finger trap and trying to pull them out, but in the opposite. So when this was run, this should not have been run in 3/4. It should have been run in 1 inch. We'll probably cut it out eventually. When I have nothing to do here, and I'll fix it, and we'll pipe it back to the top of the circulator flange and dial it in. Now, the other thing with this guy, unfortunately, when he installed this back in 2008, he didn't think of is I added this so that way here we didn't have to drain the entire system. This expansion tank was original, 20 years old. It's probably been full for at least 10, right? We can't purge the heating loop for the indirect we can't isolate it. So what I would have done is put a valve here. I would have shut that off, right? And then force water down through the coil, come back out, and then that's the return. And then the return runs up here, boom, 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 boom. We would have shut this valve, and then that's the purge. You can't do anything with it right now, though. You're kind of stuck because you'd be fighting all the water in the system. So there's just nothing you can do. There's no shut-offs minus the zone valve. So you would be fighting all of that water. That's bigger pipe, and you're going to have water wanting to flow at the path of least resistance. So it's going to want to go floop and not go through this way. So it's one thing you got to think about when you design systems. You got to be able to come back and service them. Air's a pain in the ass to purge if you can't take and stop it and then force it in that direction. So hope this helps. If you have an older system, this video was worth the watch. Take care, guys.